Okay, McCulloch versus Maryland. This is a landmark Supreme Court case, and one of the 2 dates you need to know for the federalism quiz. 1803, Marbury versus Madison establishes judicial review, this last check and balance on the system. McCulloch versus Maryland in 1819 reinterprets the necessary and proper clause and really expands the powers of Congress to a huge extent. So this is what we want to look at, this case. So you have the significance that it expands the power of Congress, that it reinterprets the necessary and proper clause, but let's look at what that really means. So the necessary and proper clause is in the enumerated powers, Article 1, Section 8. But if you step back, we want to look at the 10th Amendment, the amendment that the Confederates put into place to limit the power of the government. And so the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. That's what the 10th Amendment says. Let's break this down. So it says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution. That's referring to the enumerated powers of Article 1, Section 8. It's a big, long list of things that Congress is going to be able to do. And the fact that it's a big, long list is important, because if what they really meant was Congress can do any damn thing they please, they wouldn't have spent weeks and weeks and weeks at the Constitutional Convention writing down this really exhaustive list. Okay, so the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, this enumerated powers, nor prohibited by the Constitution to the states, that's the powers denied to the states. So that's Article 1, Section 10. So there's a section in the Constitution that says the states can't do things. Now that the central government, the federal government, this new creation, is going to get powers in Article 1, Section 8, they're going to have the power to raise and support armies, to provide and maintain a navy. So in Article 1, Section 10, we're going to take some powers away. No state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation, grant letters of marque or reprisal, coin money, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver, coin a tender and payments of debts, because in Article 1, Section 8, we give power to the central government to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and of foreign coins. So we're going to take power away from the states to do the things that we just gave to the central government. So that makes sense. Article 1, Section 8, whole bunch of new powers for the central government. Article 1, Section 10, things that the states can't do. So they can't have importing and exporting taxes. They can't keep ships of war in times of peace. So this is going to be the section that powers are denied to the states. Okay, so the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, nor prohibited by it to the states, Article 1, Section 10, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So the states in particular, the Confederates who really wanted the 10th Amendment, they are arguing, okay, we agree to this Constitution, but we want to have limits. We want to make sure that the central government doesn't grow in power beyond this box. We agree that they can have the powers in Article 1, Section 8. We agree they can have the powers, that we'll give up the powers in Article 1, Section 10, but everything else is ours. And so this power, whatever it is going to be ours, and this power, whatever that is going to be ours. Everything else is reserved to the states. Okay. That's how it was for 30 years. If you wanted to know whether or not the United States government had a power, you went to the box. And if it wasn't in that box, it was outside of the box, then it was a power for the state or a power for the people themselves. So, for instance, does the national government have the right to regulate same-sex marriage? Well, you go to Article 1, Section 8. You look up their list of powers. Nowhere on that list? Is there anything that talks about regulating marriage? There's nothing that talks about contracts of marriage. And so, according to the 10th Amendment, same-sex marriage would be a power reserved for the states. Okay. Can I wear pink? All right. Can I wear pink? There's nothing about a dress code, nothing about the United States government being able to regulate dress codes. There's nothing in Article 1, Section 10 that says the states get that power taken away from them. So I have the freedom to wear whatever I want, including the color pink if I'd like. That's a power reserved to the people. So we can do this. Federalism makes sense. And that's what this is really about, right? The state saying, hey, this is kind of confusing, this new form of government. We want to have a checklist. Okay, there's this great checklist. Article 1, Section 8 lays down all of the powers. And the states are not so naive to think that the federal government is never going to grow. They don't believe that Article 1, Section 8 is going to stay this small. And this is the real shame of McCulloch versus Maryland, is we lost the debate. So if the federal government wants a new power, if they want to, for instance, mandate that everyone buy health insurance, well, that's then something that has to be added to Article 1, Section 8. Social Security. Social Security makes total sense that we would have a national retirement system. But it's not a power given to the national government in Article 1, Section 8. So to get that power, we would need to call for a constitutional amendment. Congress, 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate, would have to propose a constitutional amendment. It would then go to a vote of the states. The states, 3/4 of whom would have to agree, would then amend the Constitution and add another power for Congress. Congress shall regulate Social Security, shall have the power to establish a national retirement system. Whatever it is, we're going to add it to. And Article 1, Section 8 might be 1,000 points long by now. I don't know. We'd have to have that debate every time. And so this was a check on the power of the federal government, that the states were going to have the amendment process before the box grew. And that makes sense, and it's rational, and it's easy to understand. So of course we screwed it up. In McCulloch versus Maryland, they screwed up this really nice checklist system that we had. Here's what they did. They took this list and they said, here's a phrase, necessary and proper. That clause is going to be an independent clause that supports implied powers. So these are the express powers, the ones we've enumerated, we've listed. But the Supreme Court said there are other powers inside of it. And by expanding the necessary and proper clause, the United States government has implied powers. Well, that screws up the whole system. So what that means is that the enumerated powers can be as big as they want, that they can have any power, because the necessary and proper clause becomes elastic. Now, never before has this necessary and proper clause been seen to be anything but reflexive. It reflects back upon the 17 enumerated powers. It's not its own power. So, first of all, the clue that I think is pretty obvious is that why would you bother to write down 17 things if you really meant, hey, you can have any power you want? But the Supreme Court is ruling that this necessary and proper clause extends beyond these 17 things and gives the Congress implied powers. That expands the powers of Congress greatly. And here's where it really screws us up today. Is Social Security constitutional? I don't know. Is Medicare constitutional? This huge power of Congress to give health care to senior citizens, I have no idea if it's constitutional. because we never amended the Constitution to give it to it. So we have debates. Is the Department of Education constitutional? Is our energy policy constitutional? Is our Environmental Protection Agency, is Obamacare constitutional? Now, Obamacare has actually gone to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has said yes, under this narrow ruling, Obamacare is constitutional. But it would have been better if we had had the discourse, the public debate, to add a constitutional amendment to agree that we want a power to be federal. Instead, Congress passes a law, and if it's not challenged by the Supreme Court, the powers of Congress grows, and the necessary and proper clause becomes elastic. That's problematic because it blurs the lines, and it means that I don't know what's constitutional or not, and you don't know what's constitutional or not. And the only people who really get to interpret it are the Supreme Court justices. And so we rely on them more and more and more and more in this federal system, but also because we don't have a good checklist of the division between the federal government and the state government. And that, I think, is a flaw of McCulloch versus Maryland. I wish that it had been decided the other way, that every new power had to go through an amendment process. I think we would have been better off for the public discourse. I think we would have been better off for the public debate. And I think that federalism would be much clearer as a result.